So Dan asked, how do we differentiate from our competitors in a meaningful way?
My question for you is, what's the purpose of your company? So reviews, price is the obvious differentiator. What type of company?
Battling with value, that kind of goes along with price.
For me, number 5 is going to be making that personal connection through contact points.
Be yourself. Everyone else is already taken.
You're listening to the Bug Bucks Podcast, hosted by Alan Draper and Eric Bassett.
Welcome to the Bug Bucks Podcast, a podcast designed to help you become a bug money millionaire. Today's episode is brought to you by Bug Bucks Plus, the #1 course designed to help you start and grow your pest control company. I'm your host, Alan Draper, and I've got my main man, Eric Bassett, here with me. Eric and I are dedicated to providing you with the best resources to help you on your journey to success. Before we begin, I just wanted to remind everybody listening, the best way to receive new episodes is by subscribing to our show on your preferred platform, such as Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you love the show, please leave us a review and a rating. And one last reminder, if you haven't joined our Facebook group, go to Bug Bucks. That's BUGBUX, and make sure to join there. We love to hear from our listeners, and we're excited for you to join that awesome community. Now on to Eric. What do you have for us, Eric?
Hey, everybody. Just as Alan was talking about, loving hearing from our listeners. In our Facebook group, in our Bug Bucks group, Dan Christensen threw out this question. That's what we're going to be diving into today. So Dan asked, how do we differentiate from our competitors in a meaningful way? What are your thoughts, Alan?
You know, the first time I kind of read that question, I don't know why, but I got this thought that the average person is going to think, how do I differentiate my company in the consumer's eyes? And I immediately thought that might be the wrong way to approach it, or there might be another way, maybe not necessarily the wrong way, but maybe we should look at how do we differentiate our companies from our competitors through potential employees' eyes. And I think this might have come from the fact that we were talking about, you know, there was another question that asked about hiring, and that was kind of in my mind. But I think that and there are certainly ways that you can differentiate your business from your competitors in your consumer's eyes, which is important. It's very important. And I don't want to kind of undermine that idea. And I have some thoughts about that also. But that was my first thought is, what are you doing differently from your competitors that allow you to recruit and retain top talent, especially service talent, technicians specifically, but I think this applies customer service, managers, all sorts of roles. But what are you doing to get these types of individuals? Because they're the ones that are going to help you differentiate your company in the consumer's eyes also. That's the #1 way to do it, is how are these people from the consumer side, how are they being taken care of? And how are they left feeling after a customer service interaction, a service, or whatever it might be?
You know, I love that you bring up both sides of it, right? The employee side and the customer side, because just like you said, your customers are going to interact with your employees much more than you probably ever will, right? Eventually. And maybe if you're a sole operator or whatever's going on, maybe you're interacting with those customers more often now, but eventually it's going to be those employees more than anybody else. When I read this question, the first thing that came to my mind, I think the biggest difference maker for us in our market was creating a personal connection with our customers. And that's something that's really hard to scale because you can't, always be in the truck, meeting customers, shaking their hands. My business partner, Jake, loves doing that, but it's just not entirely scalable. And so when we started doing, marketing efforts, and Alan, you've seen some of these, we make some of the most ridiculous videos.
They're awesome. They're awesome. And they're very memorable.
Yeah. And, we I know that there's a lot of companies out there that make ads and make funny videos and do a lot of that stuff. But we wanted to do it us, right? We wanted to have our personalities, our scripting, which a lot of those videos aren't even scripted at all. But we wanted our customers to see those videos, and whether or not they had a pest issue, I wanted them to think in their minds, those are the kind of people I want to do business with, right? If I was going to hire a pest control company, I would hire them because I can personally connect with those people, right? They're my kind of people.
Mm-hmm.
And we've done Facebook posts with photos of us. We've done obviously videos with us in it. We do parades where we're out there, we're dancing, we're with employees, we're
Mm-hmm.
kind of out there where our customers can see us personally. And I think there's a lot of business owners out there who are kind of scared to put their face out there. They're kind of scared to kind of connect themselves personally with their business. And, to each their own. I think that there are maybe some pros and cons to that, but I think that they're missing an element of connection with their customers when they're unable to connect personally. So that's one thing I would say. And to kind of touch on the employee aspect, I think the same thing applies to them. When you when you make an effort to connect personally with your employees, right? You care more about them as people than just as people that are in your business. I think that makes a difference too. And for us, I think that's really what's been the difference maker in being able to retain employees too. When they come in the door, we talk about what their vision is for their future. We try to have that align with our vision for our business as much as we can. And then we keep up to date on what they've got going on personally, right? So there's a personal connection, a personal loyalty there, not just a business loyalty or connection.
Yeah, what you said reminded me of a few points, and I think I've shared these, or we've shared these, over the several episodes that we've recorded, kind of talking about this. And there was one episode in particular, we're going to try to track it down and put it in the show notes, where we're talking about, I think it was talking about employee personnel management. And you brought up this idea of how you bring them in for reviews, and you're sitting there and you're talking about how the company can help them get to where they want to be, and kind of getting on this granular level with the employees. And I think that's huge. Traditionally, employee reviews have been from the perspective of, okay, how do we help you to help us more?
Yeah.
And if we change that perspective a little bit and we make that connection, I think we're going to retain our best people better. If it's like our best people more, we're going to be able to connect with them, and they're going to say, oh, when I go talk to my manager, the individual, first of all, is not always yelling at me. Second of all, it sounds like they care about my progress. And people that are paid a fair wage and continue to progress receive more responsibility, more accountability, and they feel challenged. They are not going to leave. And if your people don't leave, your customers won't leave. So when this idea came up, Dan asked this great question. My first thought was, well, we're in the business of retaining customers through and promoting our businesses with recurring revenue. So if I want to separate myself from the competition, I need to do it in a way that allows me to retain my customers. But there's also kind of, how am I going to do it at first contact? And I want to kind of get into that in just a second. The second thing I thought of when you were talking, Eric, was this study that I read years ago. And one of these days I need to pull up the actual source and cite it. But there were these researchers that found that surgeons were getting malpractice lawsuits, complaints to the medical board, all these things, bad online reviews, a lot more at this, this ratio much higher than family practitioners. And so the researchers probably would be, my guess, an insurance company that's having to defend these surgeons and other medical personnel. They wanted to find out why. And the gist of it was, the individual said something like, hey, I can't do that to, Dr. Johnson, my family practitioner. I couldn't do that to him. And it was the essence was, it's exactly what you're talking about. how there was a connection. And so even though the researchers found that the family practitioners were making as many and as egregious mistakes as the surgeons, they were getting sued at a much lower level, at a much lower rate because of that connection. So in business, there's a lot of ways to do that. There's a lot of ways that you can create touch points. So if you want to, separate yourself from the pack, especially with your current customers, make sure that you have those touch points. And there's lots of different ways you can do this. I talk a lot about how there are two types of resource services. There's good reservices or bad reservice. A good reservice is when something pops up, a wasp nest on their house. It wasn't there before. A bad reservice is you're returning to treat for the same thing over and over and over. So there's those types of touch points. There are ways that you can send emails. Natura, you guys do an awesome job of creating content. That's a touch point. When they see a funny video of like dad jokes or whatever you guys did that one time that made me spit my water out, like that's a touch point for them. They feel like, oh, okay. So it doesn't always have to be somebody knocking on their door, shaking hands with them. Although that's, I think that's, a very important aspect of it. So, and I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole where we're talking about how to distinguish ourselves because now we're talking about customer retention a little more and creating that that relationship with your customers. But these things are really important in terms of retaining those customers so that, and here's the kicker. If you retain your customers, you don't have to compete with the competitors, right? You don't have to worry about what the competitors are doing because your customers aren't going anywhere. Now let's back up, Eric, and let's talk about in the beginning, okay? Kind of maybe what Dan was getting to a little more. How do we distinguish ourselves from our competitors before they find us and before they become our customers? Is it our logo? Is it what do our vehicles look like? Is it our pricing? It's a very popular topic. Like, hey, in order for me to distinguish myself, do I have to be the bottom of the barrel, the cheapest service? And I think that a lot of times, Eric, people will go straight to price because it's the easiest. It's like, okay, I don't want to develop these systems. I don't want to develop an incredible marketing campaign. I don't want to develop these internal systems and, be able to talk about how we do things as part of our service that others don't. So I'm just going to make my price the lowest in the area. What are your thoughts about that?
The tough part when you first start out is that, if you're not doing door to door, then your best opportunity is probably going to be inbound leads, right? And let's assume that you've probably exhausted all your friends and family and connections, and there's nothing more that you can get there. If you've had a solid website and you focused on things like SEO and you focus on all those key contributors that get you on the front page of Google, right? All those things that people are going to be looking for. Even if you're not paying for, that some of those sponsored spots, right, in the top of the map pack. Maybe you've got Google LSA, but you don't have a whole lot of reviews that are actually like powering that. When I look at different products that I buy, so we use Amazon for an example, right? When I'm looking for a product and I go onto Amazon, almost regardless of price, not always regardless, but nearly regardless of price, I'm looking for some idea of like social proofing, right? And in Amazon, it's a really great example of this because you get to see reviews easily right off the bat, right? And I don't always necessarily go for 5-star reviews across the board. I look for high 4s because high 4s tell me that it's a proven product, that it's enough to where you're going to see some issues, right? But for the majority of people, high volume of reviews and somewhere in the high 4s is good for me, right? And so I know this is hard in the beginning, but you really have to be able to push to get reviews from people, where somebody can at least look at your listing and think, oh, people use them and people like them, right? Maybe they're new and that's okay. But as long as people like what they're doing, then they can compete with some of these other guys that have, hundreds, thousands of reviews, right? Because you're not always going to see the price like you do on Amazon. If I go on Google, I don't see pricing for anybody's listing, right? It's just not a pest control thing that we do. So that's the one thing I would say that's a really good differentiator is get reviews. And the more personalized that review is, kind of bringing that personal connection back in here. You know, if I'm early on and I'm talking to my customers and I'm saying, hey, I would love it if you'd give me a review. If you feel like I've earned one, if you could give us a review, mention me by name, that would be wonderful, right? And then if it says, oh my gosh, Eric was so great, super thorough, very professional, fantastic value, right? That personal connection is going to help people connect with you again. So kind of bringing it full circle back to that personal connection. But if you don't have a door-to-door presence and all you're talking about is just trying to build organically through digital, got to get some reviews. And obviously you're going to have your first, who knows how many customers be willing to do that for you.
Yeah, I love this idea because, when we get toward the end and we start to summarize, I'd like to make just a really quick list of the top 5 things that we've kind of talked about, and reviews and how you're going to differentiate yourself from your competitors, your company from your competitors. Reviews is definitely going to be on that list. So I love that. It's a really way to get quick differentiation, right? There's other ways to do it through, through a really clean brand, through people that have, really great manners and really taking care of their customers. But the reviews it's so impactful and it's so immediate. And it's that social proofing aspect that you were talking about. So that's definitely on the list. One thing that's really cool about our industry that I was thinking about as you were talking, Eric, is that a consumer will buy from a company they've never heard of before, which is an interesting concept. Like I was thinking about it, like, I'm not going to go buy a car from a company I've never heard of,
right?
Like a car manufacturer, right?
Oh yeah.
Like I'm not going to do that. So because of the nature of our industry, and not only that, I think there's things that you can do to differentiate yourself from your competitors by focusing on that. Sometimes it's good to be the big guy. Sometimes it's not. So I know a lot of times we'll talk about how, we're the local bug guy. And I think there's a company out there in California that's the name of the pest control company. I've heard someone needs to correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard in Southern California, there's a pest control company called the local bug guy. So anyway, but kind of that idea stands. That is like, hey, we're here. We're going to take care of you. I'm not this big, like, not Orc and Terminex, with all these resources. And I think people appreciate that. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying about, hey, I couldn't do that to Dr. Thompson or whatever. It's like when it's so much easier to hire and fire a large company than it is kind of a smaller company. And so if you kind of lead with that, like, hey, I'm local bug guy, however, whatever twist or whatever you want to put on that, like, hey, I, born and raised in Minnesota or whatever, like this is, and I use that in my neighborhood. I'll tell people like, hey, I live in this, subdivision, and there's a discount for people that, say they live here, or that they know me, I'm their neighbor, whatever. So you can use that a little bit in your marketing and sales. I think that you need to be able to create a marketing plan where you're getting out in front of people.
Yep.
If you're not on the list and people don't know who you are, then it doesn't matter if you're differentiating yourself or not. So you need, and it doesn't have to be door to door. It doesn't have to be AdWords. It doesn't have to be, some really expensive, program or whatever, but you need something. You need a plan. So step one is like, hey, how am I going to get in front of people so that they have to at least make a choice? And sometimes we're not even there yet, but if And I think Dan, has a great company. And so he's kind of already there. People know about him. So it's kind of the next level, but that's something to think about. If you're just starting your pest control company, like, hey, how am I first going to get in front of people so that, I can, put them in a decision-making position. Eric, what role do you think price has? I kind of glossed over it a little bit ago. What role do you think price has in somebody making a decision here?
So here's what's really interesting. And we've talked about this before, but you just have to understand that when it comes to the market for people who are going to buy pest control, that is very vast and wide with what people will pay and why they're going to pay it, right? So for example, there are people who will look at a cheap pest control company and they will avoid it. Why? Because they know kind of what a going rate for pest control is, and they don't like cheap things, right? It's when if you go to a Lowe's or a Home Depot and you look at power tools and you're like, okay, here are the main brands. Here's a really cheap brand. It'll probably totally work, but I'm not going to buy that brand because it's cheap, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a real big struggle for cheaper alternative brands, pest control or otherwise. When you target cheap things, you're going to attract cheap customers, right? And that's okay. And then obviously on the alternate side of things, you've got high ticket, right? High value items. And the cheap customers are going to avoid that, right? They don't want to pay the most. Okay. And then you've got all the stuff in the middle, which is a little bit different. We talked about that before. You either want to be the most expensive or the cheapest, but you don't want to be in the middle. It's kind of where you get beat up. The reason why you get beat up there is because it's difficult to identify who your target market is. And you get beat up from both sides. You get beat up from the cheapies and you get beat up from the people who are kind of high ticket people. The big thing that I want to say about price, and we teach this to all of our inside sales reps and technicians and door-to-door guys, you need to learn how to battle with value. So the biggest thing that we kind of focus on is finding a customer's wins, its wants, interests, and needs. And instead of talking about what you do and how much it costs and what the general benefits are, you focus on what the customer says is important to them, right? Is it product safety? Is it convenience? Is it you being a local company, somebody they can trust, right? Is it how easily available you are to them in case they need something? Whatever those situations are, everybody has wins, right? It's your own unique palette of what you see value in. And when you focus on those things, you'd be so surprised as to how easily the price concern melts away for most people, right? If they know what they're getting and they can make a connection to what they see value in, then people will pay a lot of money for that, right? And even when somebody comes by who's cheaper than them or whatever the situation is, it doesn't matter unless that person can focus on that customer's wins and meet those needs better than you. So when it comes to price, you need to, number one, kind of understand who you're going after. And then with that price tag, don't focus on that entirely. Focus on the value that you're delivering for that price. And then make sure that you tie that value to what is important to each and every individual customer. There's no way of all the probably thousands of customers that I've talked to and I've pitched in my career that I have probably ever sold one exactly the same way for exactly the same reasons. When I say, hey, this is going to be great for your family because of X, that reason is always just a little unique, right? And I always, recycle some of the same verbiage. You always kind of have to do that when you're talking to customers, but it's always just a little bit different. And the best sales guys, the best technicians, the best owners know how to do that. They're people-pleasing people.
Yep. Love it. As we're wrapping up here, I kind of wanted to come full circle and kind of put that question back on the PCOs. In kind of the answer in a form of a question. So you're asking us how you should differentiate yourself in the marketplace. My question for you is, what's the purpose of your company? go back to your core values, go back to why you started, go back to the strengths of what your company are, what your focuses are, and use those to differentiate yourself. And you know those better than other people. If you have this mission where you started and you're donating a certain portion of your proceeds, or we do different types of charitable events, and so we talk a lot about giving back to our communities and the specific ways that we're doing that. But ultimately, you start with kind of the core values of your company, because what you don't want is to give up your principles, like those foundational principles of your company, just to try to attract customers and make yourself different. When you should, so as opposed to fighting against those, you should use those. And, in the specific ways that, because your company's already different. And that's one of the best ways. It's like, hey, why did you start your company? Well, we started our company for these reasons. Like, it's a family-owned business, or, we wanted to give back to our community, and this is how we're doing it. So better than anybody how to differentiate yourself. You just kind of got to stay true to yourself, kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and let people see, like, hey, this is our company. These are our strengths. These are our, our people. This is what we're doing. And when you start there, then you can build, and that doesn't have to be the end all be all. So if, there are some companies that they're just, they just want to be the cheapest, right? That's Walmart, right? They always talk about low prices every day, or whatever their slogan is. So that's the angle that they took. Is that your angle? Is that the angle of your pest control company? That if it is, then hit it over and over and over and over. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, right? It's not what I would do, but if that's whatever your angle is, if it's like, okay, I had a buddy that just rolled out that he's joining a pest control company in the Idaho area, good friend of mine, they're going to focus on natural products. That's kind of who they are. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what they want to do. And so what are they going to do? They're going to hit that over and over and over. So try to find out who you are. And if you don't know who you are, then maybe it's time to figure it out. So, the answer to the question is actually a question. It's, hey, who are you, and how are you going to let other people know that? And if you do that, you do it well. The companies that build the biggest brands and are the most successful with brand imagery and brand value are the ones that just stay true to who they are and just repeat it over and over and over and over. I just, with a snap of my fingers, I mentioned Walmart's brand, everyday low prices, or some take on that. So find out who you are, what you're doing, and just hit that over and over. So as we wrap up here, Eric, let's hit those top 5. Okay. So you mentioned reviews. I think that's a great one. Why don't you hit me with one? Maybe we'll go back and forth here.
So we've got the personal connection aspect of that, right? Which reminds me of a quote, one of my favorites. It says, be yourself. Everyone else is already taken. It's an Oscar Wilde quote. So, the most authentic part of your business is you. Don't forget that, right?
Okay, cool. So reviews, focusing on, just be yourself. What type of company? We're going to throw price in there. Price is the obvious, differentiator in a lot of cases. What else?
So we got battling with value. That kind of goes along with price, right? So you have to focus on understanding exactly what your customers' interests are, and then connecting the value to that.
Yep. Perfect. So that's 4. And then if you have a final one, that's fine, Eric. But I would say for me, number 5 is going to be making that personal connection through contact points, through the technician shaking hands with the customer, mailing out birthday cards, sending an email, creating awesome videos like Natura does to share, whatever, just creating those contact points and develop those relationships with the customers.
100%. And I think that really is one of the best ones that we probably identified. Your business relationship roots only go so deep, and the personal relationship roots that you build with your customers are really what solidifies that connection. So I think that's awesome. That's a good list.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thanks for the question, Dan. Make sure that if you have a question, let us know what's something that that could help you grow your pest control company. Eric and I will try to get it on the show. And if nothing else, ask it in the group. Remember, go to Facebook and search for Bug Bucks, BUGBUX, and find us there. Request to join that awesome community we have there, and we'll catch you next time.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please show your support by subscribing and leaving us a 5-star rating. Thank you, and we'll catch you on next week's episode.